Welcome back to the shop and to the channel. Well, for those of you that have been following along some of my madness lately, may remember all the issues I went with trying to get some kind of a coolant system set up on my surface grinder. I started with the idea of designing my own tank, but then looked at the cost of having all that cut out by one of these online laser cut places like Sen, and it was just astronomically too high to do it out of stainless steel, and even using carbon steel, it was, I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit more cheap or frugal or whatever word you want to put on it, but regardless, the cost of it was just more than I was willing to invest at this point, seeing how I had so many other things going on in the shop that really needed my attention and the budget. So after finding this used coolant tank at a local machinery reseller, I figured I'd give it a go, and once cleaning it, realized just how much of a mess it was. There was a couple of spots in it that were rusted all the way through. Tried my best to weld up some patches, and that was fruitless. It still continued to leak, and quite frankly, I could have tried to chase these pinholes for days, and it probably wouldn't have made any difference whatsoever, just because of the level of rust on it. Every time I thought I was doing okay, it would blow through, and then welding that up created another pinhole, and then the cycle continued. So I finally gave up. Or at least I thought I did. A couple of you reached out through comments and other means saying, hey, don't give up on it, you could probably still use it, maybe try this or try that. And one of the suggestions was using some JB Weld. So that's what I ended up doing. I figured, what the heck, I have nothing to lose. I had the JB Weld already in my cabinet, so I mixed up a blob of it and smeared it on the side and the bottom of the tank. And, I figured we'll see what happens. Does it leak?
I gotta pay.
I ended up putting about 5 gallons of water in it, which is, put it about halfway full. And I left it sitting here on this bench for about a week. And after a week, there wasn't a drop anywhere that had come out from where these patches were. So I figured, what the heck, I will go ahead and give this one last try. The worst case scenario, I suppose, is I'm going to come into the shop one day and find a puddle of coolant sitting underneath this tank. I do want to put this thing back together the way it came to me, sort of. It came with some casters on the bottom, and this will certainly make it a little bit easier to move it around in the shop. I didn't bother cleaning these things up at all. They are still pretty dirty, and even the cap screws are kind of rusty, but quite frankly, I don't really care. This is one of those pieces that just needs to be more functional than look pretty. I got this flipped back over here so I can put the lid on it. There's just 4 bolts that hold the one side of the lid down to the tank. The other part of it's hinged for, I suppose, easy refilling and cleaning, although previous owners of this thing didn't bother cleaning it, as you might recall. Now, this is not the pump that came on this tank. This is a pump that was donated to the channel from a viewer. The other pump that came on it was actually not in terrible shape, but this one right here is certainly a lot cleaner. The holes don't exactly match up. I mean, they're off a little bit, but not enough that I'm going to worry about it. So I'm going to get this remounted. I might have to shift this, position, rotating it one way or another to make it work right. But for now, I think with the power cord coming off the back and the hose coming off the front might work, but I'm going to likely change that later. And it will fit nicely here in between my buffer and the surface grinder. It'll tuck away in there nice and be accessible, so I can get to it when I need to. Well, that pump motor is a 3-phase motor, so I will need a switch to turn it on and off. And I thought about using this switch here that I'd used to test it. The problem is really the enclosure itself is a bit small. There's not a whole lot of room in here to work. I had issues trying to get the wires connected when I was first doing my tests. So instead, I went into Fusion 360 and modeled up this enclosure and then 3D printed it. I will say having a 3D printer in the shop is just one of those indispensable tools I think everybody should have. Anyway, this will give me enough room to not only connect all the wires up that I need to the switch, but because I'm going to use this enclosure as a bit of a junction box, I needed an extra outlet for power going to the pump as well as power going to the surface grinder spindle motor. Well, I use these heat set inserts, threaded inserts. I kind of like these. You don't really have to use them. I know that there are some folks that just use like self-tapping machine screws, and those are fine. They will work. But there's just something I like a little bit better about these heat set inserts. Plus, I can use smaller hardware. Now, this soldering iron that I bought is just an ordinary soldering iron, although it does have the ability to set the temperature on the side of it. And so I set the temperature of this to be just a little bit above the normal melting temperature of PLA, which is the plastic that this is printed from. And the hardware I'm using here is going to be, I think these are 3mm button head screws. So the heat inserts are easy to install, and I just think it's a little bit of a cleaner. I don't want to say appearance, but I don't know. I just think it works better than just using some self-tapping screws. Plus, you limit the chance that you're going to end up cracking the plastic if your dimensions are off just a little bit. I'll get the latching switch here mounted in the bottom. The bottom of this is modeled very similar to the way the stamped steel one is. And I ended up putting a heat set insert in the bottom of the enclosure to screw it down to the bottom to make sure it's secured. The top is a nice, perfect, snug fit. And I did model this so that the switch itself will snap in just like the stamped piece. And now with this seated on top of it, the buttons latch. I couldn't be happier with how this turned out. Now I planned on all along in mounting this enclosure to the side of the base of the surface grinder. I modeled a couple of mounting holes in the bottom of it here, and I'm just using a transfer punch to mark the location of the first one. I'm going to drill and tap this first before I mark out the location of the second. Generally, with cast iron, you don't need lubricant because of the graphite levels in the material, but I still find that using anchor lube makes the tapping process go just a little bit better. Now I can go ahead and mark the location for the second mounting screw. Well, as I'm mounting this box up here for what I think is the final time, I'm noticing something that I made a mistake on. It might be very difficult to see from this camera angle, but that hole down there at the bottom is supposed to be for the power cable going to the pump. And well, this thing is not mounted in a location in which that's going to be even possible, because the wire gland that is going to go up inside here will end up hitting that little shelf part that's just below the box. And yeah, I'm going to have to go in and redesign this and probably have both of those cables come out the left side. Let me go into the office, redesign this, print out another one, and I'll be right back. Well, that only took a couple of hours to redesign this and then to reprint. Most of that time was spent printing. Again, I can't stress how useful a 3D printer is to have in the shop. And using some of these 3D modeling programs is really not that difficult. I think anybody is capable of learning how to make some simple parts. And the more simple parts you make, the easier it is to make the more complex ones. So now the power for the pump is going to come out of this bottom hole, where the power that goes to the switch for the surface grinder spindle will come out of the top hole. And of course, the main three-phase power coming into this will come into the hole on the back. The first thing I need to do is reroute the power coming into this switch for the spindle. Now, the new enclosure that I just mounted is going to act as a junction box here, and the three-phase power coming into the back of that gray box will just pass through into this switch. So the new switch is not going to have any effect whatsoever on the power that's going to the spindle. However, I do need to replace the cable clamp here on the back and make it straight, and then cut this cable a bit shorter and feed it into that box. Now the other end of the cable that I just cut, which has the plug on the back of it, of course it is unplugged from the wall, will feed in through this cable gland on the back of the box. And then lastly, the power that goes to the coolant pump will feed in through this lower cable gland, and then I can get everything wired up inside the box. It's going to be a little bit tight in there, not a whole lot of ways to get a camera so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to do that off camera, and I'll bring you back in a minute. Okay, I have everything wired up here in the switch. Got the grounds all tied together. Again, the three-phase that's coming in through the back will pass through to the switch to the spindle, and then it also enters the right side of that latching switch, and then the left side of that latching switch is what feeds power to the pump. I have the cover plate on the back of the pump removed here so I can get to the terminal block. I did put ring terminals on the end of the power cable, and we'll get these connected and get this all buttoned back up, and we'll give it a test. Before I put the cover plate back on, I do want to give this a quick test. I'm going to tap this power switch just to see which direction the pump is moving. If I need to swap it around, it's just a matter of switching two of these wires. Perfect, that's turned in the right direction. Now I can move on to the plumbing. Well, I already got started on the plumbing here. I've got a 3/4 inch hose here attached to a barb fitting that threads into a previously tapped hole in the table of the surface grinder. It was a 1/2 inch NPT, so I just threaded a brass fitting in there and then attached this 3/4 inch, 1/2 inch ID clear plastic tubing. The other end of that tubing will feed into this hole on the top of the tank. That'll be my drain return. We'll cut this to length. I've got another barbed fitting here and a 3D printed cap that fits down inside of that hole. The flexible coolant nozzle I picked up off of Amazon. It's just something cheap. It's got a magnetic base, and well, the spindle guard, the wheel guard on the surface grinder is made out of aluminum, and of course it's not going to stick to it. So I'm machining up this little block here that I can mount to the side of the wheel guard, so I have some place for that nozzle to stick. Hole was already existing in the side of the wheel guard. I'm assuming this was probably for coolant of some kind. Anyway, I'm going to use it to mount this steel block to, so the magnetic base for the nozzle will have some place to sit. I have about 10 gallons of water here in this tank, so crossing my fingers that the JB Weld will hold and will continue to be leak free. So right now what I want to do is test this nozzle. I want to just see how much I can close it down, because I haven't tried this yet. So I'll just stick this magnetic base to the lid here and just aim it into the hole. We'll go ahead and turn on the pump and see how it does. Hopefully this valve will let me control the flow of the coolant nicely. Kind of hard to tell with my arm in the way and this camera angle, but that seems to be working perfectly. I can control the flow. If I leave it wide open, it sprays it too hard, but I can close down this little ball valve and, you know, just have a trickle. So that's going to work out great. After talking to a few people and getting some recommendations from Keith Rucker, I ended up settling on this Trim E206 soluble oil. And I think this stuff is going to be pretty good. My concern was, you know, its life. How long was it going to stay good? If it's sitting in the tank for too long, because I know that some of these soluble oils can go rancid, and that's definitely not something that I wanted. So we're going to give this a try. Everything I've been able to find online suggests that this is a good product, that it doesn't go rancid. So I'm going to mix about 40 ounces of this stuff to the 10 gallons, which should give me a little bit more than a 3% concentration. That's the minimum for this stuff. So yeah, I mean, only time will tell, but I've got the pump turned on, and that's really just to help get this mixed up inside the tank. I'm not getting any kind of leaks in the delivery tube, so that's good. I got the nozzle now dunked inside the coolant, and that's just to kind of help keep the foaming down. So next thing I need to do is see how it works up on the table and make sure that that hose doesn't leak. I've got this remounted up here on the spindle. I'll turn on the 3-phase and the pump, and we'll just slowly open up this valve. And yeah, I think that's going to be a nice steady stream of coolant. It looks like it's been mixed up well. It's got that sort of blue tinge to it. The coolant does seem to be finding its way to the drain, which is a little bit surprising, I guess. I have not leveled this machine. I have no idea of its status of being level, and it is finding its way down into the tank. There's a little bit of a droop in the tubing, so there's going to be some coolant that'll get kind of stuck in there, but that's easy enough to drain manually. Well, the next is going to see how much of a mess this makes when the spindle is on. And so I've got this scrap piece that I just pulled out of the scrap bin. There's no dimension to this. I'm going to lower the wheel down here a little bit and touch off, and we'll go ahead and, ooh, that was a little bit heavy on the touch off. Oh well. We'll go ahead and turn the coolant on, and we'll just go ahead and give this a test grind. We'll clean this up, make it look nice. But really the key, what I'm looking for is how well this nozzle is going to work. I don't know, this will be the last nozzle I have. Be nice to have a 90-degree on that fitting coming off of the mag base. I might change that, but also really kind of to see just how much of a mess I'm going to make with this. Now the machine, when it came to me, had this piece of sheet metal attached to the left side of the table as sort of a splash spark guard. It's catching some of the spray off of the grinding wheel, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to be sufficient. Plus there's no way for it to drain really back into the table, so it's likely going to drain off of the back, which is going to create a little bit of a mess. The other thing I need to consider is just on the other side of that little splash guard is a 110 volt outlet. So I definitely need to make sure I have something over there that's going to capture any kind of spray coming off of the grinding wheel. I also noticed prior to me running this test that the coolant was dripping off of the back of the mag chuck and then down on top of the saddle. Again, this is not necessarily a huge problem. It's not a ton of coolant, but eventually it's going to make a mess underneath the surface grinder, and that's more of a mess than I'd really like. So I need to kind of figure out what I'm going to do there. Of course, I still need to do something for some kind of dust extraction. I'm sure I can rig something up that will allow me to capture any of those sparks coming off the left side of the grinding wheel. I know that there are specialized filters and stuff that you can find, but I don't think I have the room in my shop for something like that. I might just rig up a shop vac. I think a shop vac isn't ideal piece of equipment for this, but it's certainly better than nothing. I do think that the coolant itself capturing a lot of the grinding dust is going to be a huge improvement over not having any coolant at all. So that's definitely a plus. And really, it was the primary motivation for me wanting to do coolant, was to just kind of cut down on the amount of grinding dust that I was putting into the shop, because I don't want to breathe it, and I don't want that going into my air conditioning unit. Well, that's enough grinding. I cleaned up that mistake I made when I came down a little bit too hard in this piece, so it's nice and clean. I am going to leave the spindle running for a little bit. I've been told that that is something I should do when using coolant, and that's just to kind of try to get as much of the coolant out of the wheel as possible. I'm not sure how long I'm supposed to let that run for, but I know letting it run for a little bit when you're done and you've turned the coolant off certainly helps eliminate some of that moisture in the wheel, which, from what I've been told, can eventually lead to being out of balance. So I don't know if that's true or not, but it's something I heard, and letting this run for a few extra minutes after I'm finished isn't going to hurt anything. Well, it did make a little bit of a mess over here, but not too bad. I mean, I wasn't running it for that long, so I am going to have to address a few things, not the least of which is this splash guard over here on the left. I am thinking about designing something and then 3D printing it and then inserting, like having an insert for a piece of sheet metal that'll capture any of the sparks, in which the rest of the piece will capture the fluid and keep that down into the table rather than spreading all over the shop. And you can see I've got this paper towel back here. It's pretty soaked because of all the coolant that flew off of or dripped off of the back of the mag chuck. And I think that's mostly related to that fence that's attached to the back of it. That I think I can address, again, probably with some sheet metal. I can bend something up that can sit down in the back of the table and capture anything and get it back into the table, keeping it from dripping on top of those slide covers on the saddle. Overall, I'm happy with the grind. I am getting some artifacts in there, but you can't feel them. That could be related to the fact I did not dress this wheel, and this wheel has never been balanced. Maybe one of these days I'll get some kind of a rig to try to balance these wheels. But overall, it's cool to the touch right off of the surface grinder. Couldn't be happier with how this is working out so far. Overall, I'm kind of glad that I stuck through this. So hopefully this thing won't leak and I won't have 10 gallons of coolant on the floor of my shop here in the coming days. But if that happens, I'll certainly keep you updated. I would like to put like a disconnect on the pump motor though, just to make it easier to move this thing if I have to. We'll see. Right now it's just going to live right here. I don't see any reason to do it anytime soon. I think that's going to do it for this project and for this video. I'm really happy that I stuck with that tank. Although I would have really enjoyed welding up a new tank for this. I might have even made it a little bit smaller. I don't know that I necessarily need 10 gallons of coolant, but it's, I guess, better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. Your comments are appreciated. I do read them all. I don't always get a chance to respond to them all, but if you have something that you'd like to add, participate here in this process, please put a comment down below. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. It does mean a lot to me to see that, and it also helps a little bit with the YouTube algorithm. And if you really like these videos, consider hitting that subscribe button. Again, it helps with the channel growth. It helps other people know that people are interested. Subscriptions don't cost anything at all, but if you would like to contribute to the channel in other ways, there's some links in the description on how to do that. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.